Hello everyone, this is the first pre-recorded training for Finding Your Voice, and this one focuses on the mission, intended outcomes, and theoretical basis behind Finding Your Voice. So really, right before we go into this experience, reviewing what is Finding Your Voice all about. The mission is that Finding Your Voice is a safe place to provide adolescent girls with the opportunity to foster self-esteem, self-expression, and self-efficacy by engaging in outdoor recreational activities and educational health seminars. That sounds great. So, what does that actually mean? It means that while we do everything at camp, we need to be very purposeful about what we're doing and think back to the mission. How is this helping the girls foster self-esteem? How is this helping them foster self-expression? How is this helping them foster self-efficacy? We only have them for one weekend, so we need to be very purposeful with everything we're doing. So again, these are our target outcomes related to our mission. So increased self-esteem is our first target outcome. We want the girls to come out of camp feeling better about themselves and their own worth than they were coming into camp. Increased physical activity, self-efficacy. So self-efficacy is how you feel about your own abilities. So we want these girls to feel like they have more abilities to complete these physical activities than they did coming into camp. And finally, self-empowerment is how confident you feel in your own self-efficacy. So how confident you feel in your own abilities. So, over 17% of children and adolescents are overweight in the United States. And if you look at that graph, you can see that it's completely different colors from 1990 to 2010. So we went from fairly low amounts of obesity and varying degrees of overweight classifications. 20 years later, we're looking at much higher proportions, and this affects minorities and low-income populations disproportionately. Now think for a minute about why that might be. Why, if you are a part of a minority group or a low-income group, why might you be more likely to be overweight? Maybe you don't have the same access to healthy foods. Maybe you don't have the money to buy healthy foods. Maybe you don't have the time to prepare healthy foods. Those are just three examples of some factors that can go into the statistics that we're seeing. Now, physical activity is a key determinant in an individual's risk for being overweight. We don't want to see young children dieting unless there's a medically necessary reason and it's prescribed by a doctor. Therefore, the best way to help kids maintain a healthy weight is to keep them active, right? The more you run or the more you play, the more calories you burn, and then you don't have to worry as much about what you're eating. Over 33% of children and adolescents do not participate in vigorous physical activity, and only 28% of adolescents are participating in the daily recommended amount. This means that 3 out of 4 girls will not be getting enough physical activity in their everyday lives. What might this mean for camp? If you only have 1 girl out of every 4 who gets the recommended daily amount of physical activity, and then we put them into this very physical environment, what sort of things might happen? Maybe they have trouble keeping up. Maybe they start to feel badly about themselves. There's a lot of things that could happen. And you should really think through them, because you, as the counselor, are going to be the first line of defense to help them overcome that and to feel better about themselves and their abilities, even if they're struggling with some things. This brings us to, so what? Well, a huge amount of money to the tune of $92.6 billion every year is spent on healthcare and related services for people who are overweight. Now, that's a lot of money to be spent on a condition that is not entirely, but largely preventable. We know that children who are overweight are more likely to become overweight adults, and there's a lot of things that factor into that. What might those things be? Think about it for a second. Some things could be the eating habits you develop as a child, your family's habits surrounding eating, your exercise habits. Is your household one where you're encouraged to play, or one where you're allowed to sit on the couch all day? It can also affect your ability to be active, your confidence in your ability to be active, and your desire to be active. So there's a lot of factors that can be developed as a child that could factor in to being overweight as an adult. And we also know that children and adolescents who are overweight are 10 times more likely to develop hypertension. They're more likely to develop type 2 diabetes, coronary heart disease, and all of these things can lead to premature death. There's also, on a more personal level for these children, stigmatization by peers, depression and anxiety. We all know that it's really hard to be a teen. It's really hard to be an adolescent. There's a lot of things going on with your body that are changing. There's a lot of peer pressure, and being overweight does nothing to help that situation. So females are particularly at risk for decreased physical activity. They're less likely to participate in physical activity in general, and they're also more likely to cease participation earlier than boys do. So from childhood to middle adolescence, female participation rates in physical activity drop dramatically. There are a lot of reasons for this. So take a moment to think of why that might be. We're going to get to that in a later slide, but I just want you to think about why that might be. Also think about how mean girls can be. Obviously, for any child who's overweight, there is the potential for bullying, the potential for teasing, but adolescent girls can be particularly mean. And so we're really getting these girls at a formative and critical time where we can maybe help them work through some of these things before they start getting to the point of having depression and anxiety if they are experiencing these issues. So this is a graph of physical activity levels for adolescent girls and boys. And if you look at the circled area of the graph, this shows the age where physical activity levels drop below the recommended 60 minutes a day. So if you notice that for girls, that happens 1 to 1.5 years earlier than it does for boys. And that's a pretty dramatic difference. And that dramatic difference really begs the question of, why are girls less active? Well, they experience at this age a drop in self-esteem, lack of role models, body image issues, a loss of confidence. Some of them don't want to be active in front of boys. And then there's also this idea of a lack of opportunities. So high school males have 40% more opportunities to participate in varsity athletics than women. And there's a lot of reasons for this. Some could be lack of skills, some could be lack of self-efficacy, and the idea that they don't think that they are able to participate at that level. And even though we have Title IX, that doesn't always mean that access is equal. If there's a boys wrestling team, then that team can say, well, we allow girls, so there's no need to start a female wrestling team because we really don't have a lot of interest. But when you think of all these reasons why girls tend to be less active, a lot of them would play into why girls might not want to join a boys wrestling team. The wrestling idea brings us to this notion of non-traditional activities. So non-traditional activities are any activity that females do not typically participate in. And outdoor activities are another group of non-traditional activities. And female participation rates in outdoor activities tend to be very low. There's a number of reasons why. The first is gender roles, outdoor versus indoor play, and which gender that's deemed more appropriate for. The ethic of care, where women are expected to be nurturing and mothering, conforming with participation. So if you don't see women participating in these activities, you're probably less likely as a woman to want to participate. There's also the idea of fear. This idea of fear goes together with embarrassment, not feeling like you are able to participate in the activity, so you're going to be embarrassed. The idea of safety. Is it safe for you as a woman to go out into the wilderness? And socialization. Have you been brought up with the idea that it's okay for you to participate in this? And that goes to lack of exposure. There's this idea of father-son bonding out in the wilderness. Boy Scouts are very outdoors focused, where Girl Scouts tend to focus on a wider range of activities. And all of this can lead to a lack of participation at a young age, so you're never gaining the skills, the self-esteem, and the self-efficacy. So what? Well, participation in outdoor recreation leads females to a lot of positive outcomes. These outcomes include self-esteem, self-sufficiency, independence, self-trust, self-confidence, and a sense of authority, not only for themselves, but for all females. And when you're out in the wilderness, there's this idea of freedom, experiencing freedom of the body, freedom of the mind, and freedom from societal constraints, not feeling pressured by gender roles to act a certain way, and not feeling like you need to live up to those gender roles. So what are some solutions? All-female outdoor recreation activities, like Finding Your Voice, is a great solution. You create a stereotype-free environment where women can feel empowered and relaxed without the presence of men. They're allowed to take control rather than taking a more submissive role and taking a back seat to the men in the group, which often happens. And creating this environment where you get unconditional support, attention, and acceptance. So creating these safe and supportive environments allow women to make their own choices about participation, and that's really what we're trying to do with camp. Self-efficacy is one of our major target outcomes, and self-efficacy theory is the idea that you gain and cultivate your confidence in your ability to succeed in a certain situation. So self-efficacy is your belief in your own competency at a given task. And this is based on efficacy expectations, which is a person's conviction in their ability to execute the behaviors needed to produce a desired outcome. So if I feel like I can go backpacking, I know that I can carry the pack. I know I can keep up with the group. I know I can follow the trail. And so self-efficacy impacts the type of challenges we're willing to take on. It impacts our goal setting and perseverance, and it also affects our coping in stressful situations. If I feel empowered to do an activity, I'm going to use more positive coping mechanisms when I come up against stressful situations. And that's why there's such a big focus on self-efficacy at camp. And we obtain efficacy expectations from four main sources: from performance accomplishments, vicarious experience, verbal persuasion, and emotional physiological arousal. Performance accomplishments is the idea that you try an activity and you're successful. So when you feel that success, you feel a greater sense of self-efficacy. Vicarious experience is when you watch somebody do something or you listen to somebody talk about an activity, and just that small bit of familiarization makes you feel more confident in your ability to complete that activity. Verbal persuasion is when people encourage you and convince you to perform a task. You then tend to believe that you are more capable of performing that task. And lastly, emotional physiological arousal plays in, because if you're feeling very nervous you're going to feel less confident in your abilities, versus if you're feeling excited, you're going to feel more confident in your abilities. And that's it.